So you've probably all seen this land use map. A couple of years ago, in following the strategic plan that was developed, that many of you may have been involved in. There was a whole series a few years ago of public meetings to see what the community wanted downtown. So a strategic plan was developed, and out of that strategic plan came a number of recommendations to look at different projects. One was a convention hotel. Another one was to explore a ballpark or multi-purpose venue. Of course, we have to deal with parking, bringing on retail, housing development. And so as we started to look at those goals outlined in the strategic plan, it became apparent, if you remember the aerial that I showed, showing some of the vacant land, that in the Civic Center area, there was potentially a synergy that could be created by a number of those projects by bringing them together in the same area around the same time. And one of those, of course, is the convention hotel, which by its nature, of course, needs to be close to the Civic Center. And we already have the Civic Center there, which draws a lot of people, the Globe News Center. And so we began to look at how can we bring these projects together. And this was the result of a planning effort that we engaged in. We had a number of public meetings on this to get feedback. And this probably has movable pieces in it as we begin to look at this. It's not set in concrete, but it gives us something to begin to move forward on. So in moving forward on downtown redevelopment, we want to look at other cities' successes. We'll never be those other cities. We'll always just be Amarillo, which is a wonderful thing, and we need to capitalize on what we have to offer here in Amarillo. But there's a couple of key principles that we can look to other cities for, and that is the synergy of projects. Every downtown that has achieved success, no matter the size, has had a synergy of projects that jump-started that downtown redevelopment. And those synergy of projects were developed through a public-private partnership. You had the public sector at the table as well as the private sector, usually one major developer or master developer. And so as we begin to move forward on this, one of the key pieces we're missing was the private sector, and specifically a master developer that could come help us implement a synergy of projects. And these are really kind of the things that the master developer brings that's an advantage, and that is decreased risk and increased efficiency, as you have one developer to look to develop all of those projects. Less cost. For example, you have one architectural team that's doing the design work for all the projects, and so it's much more efficient and less costly. And then enhanced quality and consistency in your development. Again, you have the one master developer to look to ensure all the projects have that quality and consistency, and they're going to want that to make sure those projects are all successful together. So in exploring master developers, we did do probably a year-long search of talking to different developers. And one of the downtowns that I became familiar with was Waco. And so traveled to Waco, and there I met Joe Esch and David Wallace. And Waco, and Joe will talk a little more about this, but Waco really has undergone an incredible transformation over the past 8 or 10 years. With the help of Wallace Bajali. And so you can go through in different cities and see their projects on the ground. That was important. I wanted to see what they had accomplished, see that they were successful. And one of the things that struck me in Waco was their ability to work in an urban environment, urban redevelopment, and work with the fabric that was already there. And this is an existing downtown, of course, not a new build downtown. And so it's important to consider that wonderful urban fabric, and they did that. They have the ability to bring private capital. That's important, obviously, bringing money to the table for these projects and their expertise in accomplishing them. And they also had a great deal of experience, actually on both sides of the table, the public and the private, in reaching out to the community in a process like what we're going through now. David Wallace served as mayor of Sugar Land for 6 years. Joe Esch was head of their economic development department, assistant city manager, and responsible for a lot of the economic development projects at Sugar Land. So they understood what the public needs to gain from these projects just as much as the private. And this is one of the buildings they did in Waco, and I'm going to let Joe talk a little more about Waco. But the thing that struck me there was through a public-private partnership by the city providing land that was vacant and on the city tax rolls bringing in zero because the city owned it. The city provided the land, and Wallace Pajali spent $80 million developing on that land. And they've now paid $2 million in taxes per year on their projects alone on property that was bringing in nothing. And so that $80 million investment then in turn in about 5 years resulted in another $300 million in private investment from other investors. So within 7 or 8 years, there was about $400 million in investment in downtown Waco. That pays off, obviously. It pays off to not just the private sector, but the public sector in a big way. And you still see, if you go there, you'll still see some of the residential projects that are under construction now today. And then these are some images of Sugar Land, and I'm going to let Joe talk a little more about Sugar Land. So we started working with Joe and David February, a little over a year ago. And this last February, just a few months ago, Wallace Pajali signed an agreement with the city to be the master developer for the Civic Center area. And one of the key tenets of that agreement is that Wallace Pajali would take 100% of the risk in exploring those projects, in doing all of the due diligence and the studies that need to be done before you implement a project. That, in this economy, in a secondary market, and really at all, I've never seen another development agreement like that. It was a public-private partnership. So if the projects are built, Wallace Pajali is compensated 5.5% for all of their work, from design to identifying funding sources all the way through construction. And the identification of funding sources, and Joe will hit on this a little more, is very important. They have the skills to look at some creative funding sources that do not affect our ad valorem taxes. And then importantly, there'll be, part of their contract is to look at a new build convention hotel versus the Herring building. And we don't know the answers yet to that, but that analysis will be underway. So I love this quote. When you get to a fork in the road, take it. And I think that's what this community has done. We've come to the fork in the road and we're taking it. And we hope that you will help us along that road to be able to move forward.